We're now live on YouTube with the January 8th meeting of the Node.js modules team. There are 7 of us on the call, 6 of whom are active members, giving us quorum for this meeting. Just a quick ask to the group, if anyone's able to spend time on the notes, that would be greatly appreciated. We do have the link. I'll put it in the chat one more time. Rob says that they've got the notes. Thank you, Rob. So the first issue that we have on here is from Node.js Node 31008, which is modules implement logical ordering. Guy, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so we have a PR up for a slight change, well, quite a big change in the way that exports are matched. Right now, we have the current implementation that we've worked with so far has been based on there being some kind of hidden list of exports conditions within the resolver itself that the resolver knows about. And when it looks at an exports object of conditions like browser, node, default, maybe production and development, if we do those, it would match them in its own order that it has internally. And the concern there was that if a user is writing a few of these different conditions, it wouldn't be clear which would be used in which priority because it's actually a hidden implementation detail of the resolver itself. So maybe one resolver chooses the production condition as the highest priority and another chooses the node condition as a higher priority. It's difficult to know which exactly will match when they're on an even footing. So the premise of the PR is to switch to an object order so that the package author defines the order of entry points that should be matched. It also implements another feature, which is when there's nesting of conditions and a specific nesting doesn't match anything, it'll fall back. So the overall result is we get something that behaves a little bit more like imagining those exports object conditions as like if statements. You can now directly think of it as like acting like an if statement where it's like, if the first condition use this, if the second condition use this, and that applies through the nesting with fallbacks. And so that's why it's called logical exports conditioning, so that the model more closely matches a kind of branching if statements, which hopefully gives more control to the package author, more predictability, and less scope for weird things happening where people don't know why a certain entry is resolving. And maybe they don't have the ability to change that because they can't even change the order. They would have to do things like nesting priorities if they wanted to override it. So it puts a little bit more control back in the hands of the package author. We have approvals to get, this PR has actually already been merged into Node Master. We got the approvals, we discussed it at last week's meeting. What we are now looking at is a situation where we've got, sorry, Bradley, did you have a question on that?
It's not a question, just confirmation that the previous questions we had about if you're allowed to order JSON objects, what the ecosystem tooling is doing in support for this, how it would pan out. We haven't found any issues with any of that. It's actually a very well-defined ordering within the JavaScript spec. Some people didn't think that was true. We call it insertion order sometimes, but it's ordinary own property keys is the exact algorithm we're using. Yeah.
So Gus also had a specific change he requested on the PR, which was that array indexes in objects don't follow the same ordering. So if you have a number, the numbers are always going to come first in the order, and then the other keys in insertion order. So the concern there was that userland tooling, if it happened to use numbers, would be in a situation where the ordering wouldn't work out. So to be extra cautious on that, we've added an additional validation phase to the PR, which basically is exactly the spec, the ECMA 262 spec on isArray index to determine to ensure that there are no array indexes within the object. And if there are, we throw a validation error at the moment. And that applies to both the CommonJS and the ES module, the resolver implementations. So it's fully well defined in that sense, and in alignment with the spec. So we got that merged. We got agreement on that. We came to consensus on that within the Node process based on agreement from last meeting. And at this point, I feel that the feature, like, to me, that makes exports feature complete at this point. We've got the niceties, we've got the sugar, we've got the ordering. It's looking really nice. And the only other PR outstanding on exports is the actual unflagging PR at that point. I don't know if that's another agenda item or if we want to discuss that now.
Yeah, I'd say let's discuss that separately in the pull requests that's specifically for it. Because I think we have that, yeah, we have separate items about that. This pull request for logical conditional exports has already landed, as far as I know. So there is no more kind of action on that, as far as I know. Does anyone else have last little bits to add to this, or are we good to move on to the next item? Okay, I'm removing the agenda item from that PR. The next one is we have number 31002, unflag resolve self. Jan, would you like to take this one?
Let me look. Unflag resolve
I
self.
can take it as well.
I
It
think
looks like it's landed.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think it's just,
It went out in 13.6.
yeah, self-resolution is now a thing in Node stable. So congrats to Guy for making this happen.
Very cool. Anyone have anything else to add to this?
I can briefly update on some of the details. So one of the big issues with this feature was making sure that it was backwards compatible for CommonJS, because we just implement it and there happens to be something in Node modules that matches the package.json name, and people were relying on that, it could potentially be breaking to change the resolution and no longer respect the Node modules resolution. And the compromise we came to on that was that this feature is only supported when you use exports in the package.json. So if you don't have exports in the package.json, you cannot import a package by its own name. As soon as you put exports in there, you're getting the exports representation of the package.
If you wanted to, you could make a single export that was // to / and then it's equivalent.
Right. So yeah. So, and it's also another justification for preferring exports in general. Yeah. Sorry, my connection is unstable, so I'm just going to boot out and come back in, but please continue on the agenda.
Okay. So anyone else have anything else to add regarding the unflagging of self-referential modules? Nada, nothing, Bueller? Okay, cool. The next one that we have is unflagged conditional exports. This is 31001. This was also a Guy Bedford joint, but in lieu of Guy Bedford, Jan, do you want to take this one on? Or I guess this is an extension of the conversation that we were just having, specifically that like the logical conditional exports landed. It seems that, you know, with that in place, we kind of have all the pieces necessary to unflag conditional exports. I do know that one of the things that, you know, had been discussion was whether or not, you know, an alternative implementation was going to be looked at. One of those was potentially require ESM. My understanding from looking at the current implementation of require ESM, though, is that like one does not necessarily preclude the other. They do have unique benefits for both patterns. So I, for one, am in support of landing this unflagging. Guy, do you have anything to add here?
I think I'm pretty happy with where we've got to on this feature personally.
So this has, it's about to be 3 LGTMs upstream. Just checking to see, just got to run CI on it. Does anyone have any objections to us landing this later today if CI is green?
I'll just. I think yes. So my memory is that we were supposed to discuss. So basically, Wes isn't here, and I feel bad about us making this call right now, when kind of he was the one that we wanted to discuss this with, and making this call in his absence doesn't feel great. I think we can make the call, but I think I would prefer it if we can get Wes's, if not blessing, then at least his awareness.
Yeah, what I would add to that, and then Brad is up next, is like that seems reasonable. I also think for the timelines that we've discussed, like all the behavior changes that we've wanted have landed. So the only thing that we're talking about right now is the commit that unflags it. And, you know, for the timelines for backporting, this doesn't affect anything. So that seems reasonable to me. Brad?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Miles said. It might be possible for us to reach quorum here and then take it directly to Wes, so we don't have to go to another meeting about unflagging it. So that would still give Wes the opportunity to reply, and we could even wait on a reply. I think he might be on vacation, given some correspondence I've got going on with him. So we can wait for that, but if possible, I would like us to reach consensus here that if he doesn't object, we are okay with unflagging it, just so we don't have to have a back and forth with these meetings.
Does anyone object to, you know, explicitly reaching out to Wes, and if Wes has no concerns, moving forward with landing?
My only concern is, like, if he were to be on holiday, say for the whole of January, that we shouldn't be indefinitely waiting on a response. But certainly within reason, if we can get a response from within the next week, that sounds like a really sensible way to go about things.
Okay. So at the very least, how about we tentatively try to do that between now and the next meeting? And if he's still on holiday at the next meeting and we have not received any response and he's not at the meeting, then we revisit this and discuss. Does this seem reasonable to you, Guy?
Yeah, as long as that's not going to set us back too much on the release timelines. If it's just an unflagging, and that's not an issue.
Yeah, and I guess my intuition here, and could be wrong, is that I don't think that this affects release timelines at all. Like it does affect the conditional exports landing in a Semver minor release of 13, but that would not change any of the backports to 12, for example, and it wouldn't change any of the behavior. It's just whether or not it's flagged.
Right, but the flagging affects whether or not people can publish dual mode packages.
Yeah.
So in terms of that major behavior, if we would still be able to get that out on 13 is the thing, I guess.
Yeah, that's reasonable. So yeah, I think we have consensus on next steps here, and I'll try to be a little bit active to make sure we can move things forward. The next one we have is number 31032. Import meta resolve. I believe that we had an implementation. We were talking to what working group, trying to align the implementations between them. Guy, do you have an update on where that's at?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. It's been in discussion for quite a while for the browser, and it's sort of been an idea that's been bouncing around for a while at the sort of spec level with import maps and things. In Node.js, it's the equivalent of require.resolve. And it's kind of if you think of require.resolve as one of the use cases of require, one of the core use cases of require, supporting import.meta.resolve is a important convenience feature And the approach to the PR is it calls the resolver whatever the resolver might be, including any loader hooks that have been applied to the resolver. You can provide a specifier, a relative specifier, a package name, a path within a package, and it'll resolve it. You can also provide a path that isn't a module. So even if the module type wouldn't have been interpreted as a module, it'll still support it. So you could be referencing an asset or something that's running through exports resolution through package configs. And so that's potentially quite useful for asset workflows. It's async because our resolver is async, and we've had some back and forth on this, trying to determine if the resolver needs to be async or if we can syncify it over the loader boundaries. Async feels safer because in theory, if we have code in the wild using await import.meta.require something, .resolve something, in theory, that same code would run if we then syncify or resolve in future, whereas the converse would not apply. If you have import.meta.resolve running synchronously and someone's not putting an await in there, we can't as easily make it async in future. So it's a sort of a hazy argument for it being a slightly safer path. In the browser, there is an argument for async because of package array fallbacks in import maps, which in theory would make resolution potentially async. There may be other things that make resolution async as well, like, for example, dynamic import map injection. I sent the PR to Hiroshige and Dominic, and they agreed that async could be an alignment. It was difficult to get agreement from them or like non-objection from them or anything, because obviously this is a situation where the browser is still also determining what it's going to do. What makes this interesting is because it is a place where Node.js might actually be able to move first. So it's kind of like, do we take the leap, put something out there, potentially make it change in future, or super conservative and follow the browser? But this is a place where Node.js can potentially lead. I would like to land it personally, but I can understand if there's resistance to that.
Is it behind a flag?
Right, the current implementation is not flagged.
Okay. Brad has his hand up. Brad, go first, and then I'll respond after.
So, I believe this is our first modules meeting with this topic. I know I've talked in the past a bit about this with you, Guy. I'm gonna start off with I'm not comfy landing this unflagged for a while, probably. In particular, there are some things that are going on in the modules working group that seem like they need potentially to hook into this. We don't have a way of passing conditions to this resolve, but we're using conditions in our exports for logical ordering. Similarly, there's the TC39 module attributes proposal, and I'm not quite sure how that works with this. There's just a variety of things where I feel like this on its own is being simplified, and we would have to replace it with something more feature rich in order to get a lot of the utility of having a resolver. It might work for the 80-20 case, and that might be enough for this, but it seems like we need a much more feature-rich API after this, no matter what, as it stands. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Brad. What I would add to that is like, and it seems like maybe we could reach consensus on this, similar to JSON modules. I think that it is premature to land something like this unflagged. At the very least, even before implementation, I think we could probably work with what working group or the HTML spec on spec text around this and maybe reach consensus. And I would be concerned about us unflagging anything if we're expecting interoperability before there is some degree of spec text and some level of like more clear consensus across our different groups. If we don't care about interop with this particular feature, or if we think that the browsers aren't going to do it, then it would be a different story. But I think it would be premature to land unflagged right now, personally.
So I can respond to those points. Firstly, in terms of interaction with conditions, conditions are environment specific. So all conditions are constants of the environment. If you want to have a generic resolver, I think that's another question. A generic resolver should have other features such as file system abstractions, hooks into package resolution, things like that. You get this kind of super resolver concept. And I think that's a very different thing to import .meta.resolve. Rather than being an 80-20 situation, I think they're two separate things. The one is a generic resolver anyone can use as a library. The other is the local environment resolver and being able to hook into it. And the local environment resolver is set to the local environment. So if you're in production, or if you're in the browser, or if you're in Node, it's going to resolve with those conditions, just like an import does. And that's what require.resolve does as well. It matches the current environment. And then Bradley's other point was module types. Personally,
Not types.
Sorry?
Module attributes. I personally have very little care for module types.
Module attributes in relation to
Resolution.
I was under the impression that module types was one of the only specs that would have inputs into resolution.
So they don't affect resolution, they affect allowable formats in response. But in the proposal, it's a generic thing. There are a variety of different kinds of module attributes discussed in the issue threads that potentially could. In particular, Babel and them have ideas in this area.
Right. Personally, I think it's quite dangerous to consider additional metadata that affects resolution. If such a thing were to be created, we could always change the API. Because modules are experimental, I don't feel we have to be tied to any API. I feel like this is one of the few situations in which Node is actually in a situation like Chrome is as a browser, where it can just ship things and do them and then follow up with refinements and breaking changes that get the feature right in future. And this is, I think, pretty much one of the only cases where Node.js is in this position in terms of the module system for JavaScript. And my feeling is that we could potentially even help push browsers in the direction of implementing this and really just put an acceleration on things. Because if we do it, it's very easy for browsers to follow us. If we expect some spec to emerge that in truth probably means some of us putting a lot of time into it, I think that sets us back a whole bunch of time, like a year, and puts us in a very different situation. So I would love to just put the accelerator on this and accept any breaks down the line, because it's not as critical.
Yeah, but are you saying breaks in an unflagged API or in a flagged API?
In an unflagged API.
I don't really think that's super acceptable, personally. Brad, you have your hand up?
Sure. So just kind of in a little bit of a different direction. We seem to have some discussions about interoperability and breakage going on. It might be possible that we don't put this on import.meta. And that might be a way around some of the issues that we're coming to. We made create require. We could make some kind of create resolver in a similar manner, because this API, as it's in the PR, even allows you to specify a different URL upon which to do the resolve against. It doesn't just do against your local context, your current URL. You can actually like impersonate other URLs to do things. So if we're already including that behavior, it might be possible just to, say you've got to import this for now. So we do have ways of doing warnings on that. That might be acceptable because we do have some unflagged APIs with warnings on them, if I remember correctly.
And just to chime in quickly before Jan goes, if we put this as like an experimental API on module or something like that, that appeases my concerns about it being flagged. Jan, did you still have something to add?
Nope.
And Guy, depending on what we do, if we make it a slightly lower level API, it is something that could be part of the eventual import meta resolve when we do land that.
Yeah, no, it's just about timeline. And the point is, when you're dealing with build tools, one of the primary things, like in my work on NCC, one of the primary features that was necessary was the ability to analyze asset references. It was Sebastian Mark-Page's asset reference proposal. The benefit of import.meta.resolve is it's actually statically analyzable to a large degree, just like dynamic import. And the benefit of that is that asset references become statically analyzable. If we have an out-of-band API, yes, that's still statically analyzable, but not quite to the same level, to the point that pretty much no build tools will support any analysis of it. So it just sets us back on that timeline, which is fine, but it's just unfortunate. In terms of breakage, what I was discussing at the beginning was the sort of break that we might expect is something like the browser says, hey, actually, like, we're going to do this API, but we're, for example, not going to support the second argument, and we're going to make it sync. Now, if someone is using the 80% usage of this API, which is they're awaiting it, and they're maybe not using the second argument, the sort of impersonation, as Bradley refers to it, then they would be in a position where their code would still work. It only breaks the 10, 20%. And I feel like that could be acceptable, but I certainly understand that's something to be wary of, and if people don't want to go ahead with it.
I mean, we could kind of do a bit of both and have import meta resolve as a flagged API and expose the lower level API as an experimental API on modules unflagged.
Yeah, maybe some kind of middle ground approach like that would be sensible and be a route to get there, definitely.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I want to like encourage the experimentation with this API, the engagement with what working group, and trying to create a reasonable timeline on getting this out. I just want to like ensure that like our ecosystem doesn't have usage of an API that is like nothing what it will be in the future, without there being like really clear steps to kind of avoid people from using that all over the place. Because especially something like Resolve is one of those APIs I could see people picking up and using fairly extensively.
Okay, I can certainly flag the PR, and that.
Okay, cool. Anyone have anything else on this particular topic? Okay, so the next one we have is 31229, move ESM loaders to worker threads. Brad, I believe that one is you, is that correct?
Yeah. Sorry. This is coming in a bit hot. So we've had people discuss in the past moving loaders onto both isolated realms and different threads. So this PR is definitely not ready to land anytime soon. But it kind of is something we can base discussion around. So it does move our loader hooks into a separate thread. It does not change the API for the hooks, except for removing dynamic instantiate, because dynamic instantiate simply doesn't work off a different realm. Like it cannot in any way. So we're gonna have to solve some issues caused by that. But so this PR is a way for us to discuss basically having these on a separate thread. Some keynotes here. Instead of spawning a new loader in every thread, so currently if you spin up a worker thread, we spin up an entirely new loader instance. this doesn't do that. The thread is shared amongst all workers and the main thread. So you have one loader instance in a new kind of thread. It's called an internal worker. And that is going to be able to basically receive requests from all the other threads. We're going to probably need to add some hooks because of this isolation issue. So right now we don't really have a clean way of intercepting the -- require flag from the CLI, nor do we have a really clean way, if this is on a separate thread, to instrument globals and things of that nature. So we will need to do that. I don't want this PR to expand to do all those other things. I want this PR to be blocked on all those other PRs that we could land. So I want to keep this purely as a PR where we can state, okay, in order to land this PR, we have to get this feature, such as the ability to, mutate globals. And then we'd go make a separate PR for that hook, and then put it as a blocker for this PR. So yeah, that's the basis.
Corey?
Yes, so I just wanted to ask if this PR is going to be open for a while to deal with potential issues. Would it make sense to separate out the removal of the dynamic module, the dynamic indentation? Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. That way that feature can get removed before too many people have a chance to use it.
It's possible we could do that. I don't see a large benefit of doing that right now. So if we look at what we did for the get source hook, we actually tried to keep that incremental. We have a very awkward API signature right now to keep older versions of loaders working with it, where the resolve can actually still return a format, even though there's a separate get format hook. I feel like we can mark it as going to go away, but I don't see removing it actually helping our users right now. So, yeah.
Okay, I think documenting it as such wouldn't be a bad idea. The main point that I was bringing up is essentially making sure that people know that it's not staying, and avoiding having it go into use if we know that we're going to remove it.
It's already in use, to my knowledge. A few people are using it, so we'll see.
What are they using it for?
They're mostly using it because they don't want to do weird source code transforms. So hopefully once they get the get source hook, we can see if they transition over.
Jan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I kind of agree with Corey that I would definitely prefer if we can remove dynamic instantiate rather sooner than later, or at least add a deprecation warning. Because I'm definitely concerned that people find it and develop a whole thing on top of it, assuming that something like it will come. And I think we should tell them as soon as possible that something like it might not come. Maybe a good thing also to kind of figure out as soon as possible is, do we have quorum on doing it in general, like moving to an isolated context? Because if we do have quorum, then we can make a very clear, decisive action of saying, yes, dynamic instantiate is definitely deprecated. We definitely need to communicate that this is going away. And I think we are at a point where we could say that, we could make that call.
I just have a question before maybe asking everyone about quorum for that.
Go ahead.
So I assume we can still, like, putting these in their own, I guess each loader would be in a separate thread. I assume we're still able to, like, serialize loaders. So if you have, like, you know, a CoffeeScript loader and a Babel loader, then one can output into the other. That'll still be possible in the thread version.
It is possible, yes. This PR does not do so though, because our current implementation.
Well, yeah, and the current master doesn't do it either, but it's not, like, I'm wondering, what does this PR preclude? Like, if going the way of this threads thing means we can't have dynamic instantiate, what other things does it mean that we won't be able to have? And are there any of those other things, like, concerning? You know, that would be the only reason I feel like we wouldn't want to say, yes, let's go forward with this.
So the big things are the isolation and what that means. So right now, if you go and you make a global in your loader, however you want to, using global this or the global variable, whatever, you can see that in user code and you can kind of interact with your loader by doing so. So you can actually do some hokey things where you're sharing functions that are coming from your loader with user code. You won't be able to do that anymore. You will need to do some sort of message passing of some kind. So not ideal, but in theory, you could make stuff work for that. In general, though, sharing executable code and globals with your loader, probably not the best idea, especially since doing so would mean that we have to spin up a loader instance for every context, which is what we're doing right now. That does have an impact. So if you spin up 5 threads right now with CoffeeScript loaders, you spin up 5 different CoffeeScript loaders. So each CoffeeScript loader, while it's able to talk in this kind of first-class object manner, it starts to have to coordinate with all the other CoffeeScript loaders if it does anything like saving things to disk cache, stuff like that.
What about test runners and stubs? I'm just thinking of, like, Mocha.
I mean,
and,
test
like,
runners
all of
and
its
stubs, we don't have a good solution for, to my knowledge, anywhere in this. Like,
yeah, but I mean, I'm just thinking, like, Mocha adds a lot of globals. Stubs, we obviously want to, like, override globals. Does this make either of those any worse, or?
I would say it makes them minorly worse until we add some other hooks. So those globals that they add don't interact directly with how modules are evaluated for Mocha and stuff. So should be fine. The bigger problem for a lot of those utilities is going to be the module cache. We don't have the module cache exposed in any form or fashion. So, yeah.
But that doesn't change by the fact of us going to threads. Like, that's just still a problem we need to solve independent of this, and this doesn't make it worse, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Brad, anything else to add, or should we
No,
move on? We still have quite a few agenda items from the modules repo to get
I
through.
think Jan just was asking if we have quorum that we want to try to isolate loaders.
I thought the question was if we had quorum to deprecate or remove dynamic instantiate now, since we think we're going to go that way.
I think so. Just to clarify, since my name was brought up, my point was, step 1 is, do we have quorum to decide? Yes, we want to have loaders be isolated. We don't want to run them in the same global scope as the code that is actually running the user in userland. And I think that will inform a lot of the other choices. Like, for example, then I don't think we need to vote on whether we want to deprecate dynamic instantiate, because, well, at least effectively, we need to kind of deprecate it. So there's no real decision to be made anymore.
Well, we could do it now so that it's removed earlier than later. I think that was
Right,
that
but
was
then we
what I thought
can
we
adjust
should.
those PRs as they come in. Like, I think the highest order decision is, yes, we want to isolate loaders from user code.
Okay, let's ask about that. Do people want to state that they would prefer having loaders share the same global space as user code? It seems
Can you-
like this
Can you
PR.
describe the advantage of not having them share the same state? Global state?
What?
What's
Well,
the advantage of them not having?
So you don't have the same kinds of attack vectors, such as prototype pollution. Also, that means that you can share loaders between multiple threads if we do that. You can't share loaders between threads because they can't have the same global context if they run in the same global context.
How does the current PR handle worker threads?
So it passes, well, it creates a new message channel per spawned context, and it passes that to the internal worker, and they all communicate over their message channel to the same internal worker, which gets a client ID, which I believe is the thread ID currently in the PR. So it can differentiate which thread is doing something. They've got a similar concept in the browser. Nobody really differentiates per thread currently. At least no service.
So worker threads currently share the same loader registry, right?
In master right now, no.
So when you spawn a worker thread, you've got a new loader, and when you load a module in a worker thread, that module is executed afresh. So you effectively got multiple instances of your modules between your worker threads and your main thread.
Yes, that is also true with this PR.
And so with this PR, the loader is then...
Can we separate between loaders and hooks? So every single thread will always have a loader, its own instance of a loader with its own module map. I don't think that anything will ever change that, just because the modules have to be attached to the context. So there's no sharing of that part. So the hooks are shared. That's the big difference.
So the difference is right now, the main thread loader effectively runs for all the workers. Someone needs to take notes, apparently. All right, I will stop there. We can move on in the discussion.
Okay.
I mean, the usual question for consensus is, are there any objections to us isolating the loaders into their own context so that they can be shared and that we can freely write user code without being afraid that you might break the loader and all that kind of stuff? So I feel like somebody would need to object according to our current process for us. Yeah.
So do you think that it's reasonable to just move forward and handle this in the pull requests and just go through like the existing process, since it doesn't seem like anyone has extremely strong opinions?
That seems fine to me. This PR also is probably going to take a few months to land, at least,
Okay.
at minimum.
So I have to leave early, and I would love us, if possible, to talk about one issue which has been on the agenda for a while and we haven't gotten to it. Is everyone okay with us moving on?
Let's move on.
Okay. Issue number 412 from the modules repo is chartering the modules team. And not something we've managed to actually discuss in a meeting. We don't have time to like extensively go through it. But you know, my intuition is that we kind of have everything we need in place for the most part to charter, aside from you know, like there's like some small bits we need to go through. And I was just curious what people's temperature is, if they like how things are set up right now as a team, if we do want to charter, and if we were to charter, you know, like what would we be saying we want kind of authority or purview over if we did so. Jeffrey?
My only concern about this is that, like, the both times we've had any major release, whether it was last November or getting the ECMAScript modules repo like merged into 12.0.0 as like the new implementation, we pretty much had to like break our own rules or threaten to dissolve the group just in order to get consensus. And I'm just concerned that if we like are officially chartered, then like those don't become options anymore, and then we truly are in danger of absolutely stalemating, and then like that's just, you know,
Can be
then the group
dechartered.
is dysfunctional, you know.
Groups
I don't know.
can be dechartered.
Unchartered.
Yeah. I think like my gut on this is mostly along the lines of like the people who are maintaining the source in core are all in this group. We're actively meeting, we are developing strategy, we are consulted, like we are acting as if we are chartered already in all but like official capacity, which is generally like a good time to consider it. We also don't need to, like, it's not blocking our ability to do anything. But maybe, you know, we don't need to dig too much into it today. But we do have that open issue. And if people have feelings, it would be great if you could chime in. This has been on the agenda 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the 4th time it's been on the agenda. And we haven't really discussed it yet. Guy?
I'm just wondering, you say up until now, we're almost acting as if we are already chartered, and I think that's true, and that's a very good point. But then the converse to that is, what are the more tangible benefits of chartering? You know, if there's no risks, then certainly let's go for it. But also, what are the benefits, and what should we think about in terms of that?
I think being officially recognized as owning the things in which we own, from like a process perspective, would allow, for example, you know, members of this team to block things upstream, theoretically, could stop the TSC or other groups from unilaterally making changes without, you know, us chiming in. I think like part of the chartering process is also kind of, you know, outlining what the expectations are. To be frank, I don't have a ton of experience chartering a group that's responsible for a part of the code base. My experience with charting was more with like the release working group, which had like really clear external the external controls, the external work. It wasn't like inside of core. We can maybe talk to someone like Matteo Colina from the streams working group and like find out what the benefit they've seen from chartering would maybe be the closest group to compare to. Going to take the silence that it's time to move on.
I think if we can work out some good governance rules, I think it sounds fine to me. But maybe we should give some thought into that.
Okay, cool. I have to drop now, so I'm going to go ahead and make Guy the host because he's done it before. I'll let you all take it from here. Thanks everyone for tuning in today.
I think we're almost at the end of the agenda already. Of the remaining items, we have stabilizing the resolver, unflagging in 12.x, loader hooks, which I think we actually haven't discussed, and patching instrumenting a module. Does anyone want to bring anything up with the remaining 3 minutes?
Well, we just
Don't-
landed that hooks PR, so that's new. I guess.
Sure,
something-
let's discuss that briefly.
Yeah, so I did a lot of work on that with Brad and some others, and there's still much to be done. So I think if people want to check out, it's still just on master. It hasn't been released on a point release yet, but if you check out the latest master and build it, or I guess pull down the nightly, there are now 4 hooks with the loaders. Forget dynamic instantiate for now, but there's resolve, get format, get source, and transform source. And they're kind of sequential, where resolve takes a specifier, gets a URL, get format takes the URL and returns a format, get source takes URL and format, returns the source, and then transform source optionally does something with that source. I haven't really gone through our long list of use cases for loaders to see like which ones are still unsatisfied with this, but that would be something that we should probably do. I know there were concerns from Guy and Bradley about redesigning just how loaders work in general, and if we're going to do that, we should probably do that soon, or at least have a plan for what that new design should be, so that people who want to work on this area can shift it more in the direction of the desired design. Yeah, and we still have, I think probably the biggest outstanding thing is like, I think test runners and stubs, we need to figure out good solutions for those. And I feel like that's probably is something we do with loaders, or that loaders are involved in. So if anyone's interested in those areas or has ideas on it, we should start talking about it.
What
Maybe
is
not
this?
right now.
What is the status on multiple loaders? Have we discussed that at all recently?
Last I heard, I had that very old PR and people didn't want it at the time, so it has stalled forever.
Actually, I have a question for you, Brad. Is with the work of moving it to threads, is there anything that we shouldn't do, like in master related to loaders? Like obviously we shouldn't develop dynamic instantiate any further, but like beyond that, is there any, like if someone wanted to make a new hook, is there a problem with that? If someone wanted to work on how data gets passed between hooks, like is there anything we should be concerned about or avoid doing because of the intention to move this stuff into threads?
As long as you can roughly ensure everything could be JSON between the hooks, so no passing of functions between hooks, it should be fine.
So in the thread, it's not just each loader is in a thread, but each hook is in its own thread?
Nope. Each set of hooks is in its own thread, but multiple hooks are in the same thread.
I think this is the moment
Okay.
where we'll pitch the instrumentor name for a collection of connected hooks provided by the same file. Because I think since there's now a plural of hooks, which is multiple hooks, like it becomes super confusing.
I'm actually gonna have to drop, but I think for the most part, you don't have to worry too much. I will try to comment on anything that appears odd.
Okay.
Yeah, we've pretty much reached time. Corey, did you want to make a point briefly?
Well, yes, I just wanted to comment on the multiple loaders not being wanted. I do think that somehow there needs to be some kind of way to accomplish that. I know somebody had mentioned doing that in user space, but ultimately my concern with user space is that essentially requires every single loader to essentially share whatever it is combines multiple loaders. And I'm also not sure how the multiple loaders would be added to that share loader. So I'm hoping that at some point there can be more thought or discussion on that.
We've got 2 more hands up. We have pretty much reached time. Admittedly, we did start 3 minutes after the hour. Jan?
Try to be brief. I'm definitely one of the people that are skeptical about Node Core supporting multiple loaders. And my main reason is that some of the more complex scenarios where multiple loaders are trying to affect the same kinds of things end up with scenarios where technically one loader needs to run the resolve first, but then the other needs to get the source first. And so you get these weird scenarios where actually properly orchestrating when which loaders hooks run becomes more complicated than I would expect Core to manage. And even if Node.js would come up with an officially supported system that is published to NPM to orchestrate that kind of everyone is using, at least that kind of system could have a config file or some package.json flags that it looks at, and it could evolve at a pace that's anything built into Core to orchestrate multiple loader hooks couldn't. And that is kind of where I'm getting very nervous about trying to do all the orchestration of multiple loaders interacting with each other in Core at this time.
And Jeffrey?
Yeah, just to follow up with that, I think it's inevitable that, like, I'm just thinking of Gulp as the example. Like Gulp has, in Gulp 4, there's gulp.series and gulp.parallel, where you can pass it a bunch of functions to either run in series or in parallel. And it's like, having Node do this in Core, either we're going to do some kind of much more simplistic version, or like I think it's inevitable that userland will produce something like Gulp that groups together loaders in whatever ways they need to be orchestrated, kind of like Jan is saying. And that's going to happen no matter what Node does, even if Node offers something in Core for like running them in sequence or something. So then the question is, like, if Node is to offer something in Core, what should it be and how sophisticated should it be? Because yeah, then it's like, is it really Node's place to compete with things like Gulp? Or yeah, so I'm not opposed to it. I think Node should probably offer something simple in Core, but we kind of have to be careful in designing this to make it not too simple that it doesn't accomplish anything useful, but also not like, not like we're competing with the Gulps and Webpacks of the world.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm going to end the stream there.